We are taught that the atomic age began in a sterile laboratory. We are told the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer, the tortured genius standing before a chalkboard filled with elegant equations. We are told about Albert Einstein writing a desperate letter to President Roosevelt, warning him that the Nazis might build a doomsday weapon. We believe that the atomic bomb was a triumph of theoretical physics, a victory of mind over matter. But this is a lie, a sanitized academic fairy tale designed to make you feel comfortable. The atomic bomb was not built on a blackboard. It was not summoned into existence by a formula. It was dug out of the mud. It was ripped from the earth by starving men in a place that wasn't even on the map. While the greatest minds in America were arguing about whether a chain reaction was theoretically possible, a Belgian businessman named Edgar Sengier was already sitting on top of the answer. He didn't have a PhD. He didn't care about neutrons or critical mass. He cared about supply chains. And in 1939, while Washington was asleep at the wheel, he quietly moved the most dangerous substance on the planet into a warehouse on Staten Island, New York. He didn't ask for permission. He didn't tell the government. He simply waited. He knew that eventually the superpowers would wake up and realize that their equations were useless without his rocks. But before we open the door to that warehouse, you need to understand where this rock came from. Because the true horror of the atomic age didn't start in New Mexico. It started with a warning that the locals had been whispering for centuries. To understand why the world ended in 1945, you have to smell the humid, copper-scented air of the Katanga province in the Belgian Congo. Deep in the jungle, there was a hill that shouldn't have existed. The colonial maps marked it as a resource. But the indigenous people knew better. They called the place Shinkolobwe. In the local dialect, the name refers to a thorny fruit that, when boiled, scalds and burns the skin. It was a linguistic warning sign. Do not touch. This place burns. The locals avoided the hill. They knew the water there tasted like metal and death. They knew that animals who grazed there grew sick. But in 1915, a British geologist named Robert Rich Sharp ignored the name. He didn't hear a warning, he saw a ledger. He saw the heavy, greasy black rocks with veins of yellow lightning running through them. He saw profit. Now, listen closely to these numbers because they explain everything that happened in the 20th century. In the 1940s, the average uranium mine in Canada or the United States produced ore with a purity of roughly 0.03%. To get enough uranium for a bomb, you would need to sift through mountains of granite for decades. It was logistically impossible. But Shinkolobwe was a geological freak, a mistake of creation. The ore pulled from this scorched hill wasn't 0.03%, it was 65%. It was 2,000 times more potent than anything else found on Earth. It was so rich that the waste piles outside the mine contained more energy than the richest mines in America combined. The owners of this land, Union Minière du Haut-Katanga, were the cold-blooded kings of the colonial world. They were copper barons. To them, this black rock, pitchblendy, was initially a nuisance. But in London, a terrifying realization was beginning to dawn. British scientists hinted to Edgar Sengier, the director of Union Minière, that this waste product might theoretically be used to blow up a city. Sengier looked at the thorny fruit that burns, and he decided to harvest it. You might think the Nazis were the biggest threat to this stockpile, but the real danger wasn't a German invasion. It was American incompetence, and one man was about to bet his entire fortune on a hunch that would save the world. September 1939. The Nazis invade Poland. The lights go out in Europe. Edgar Sengier is sitting in his office in Brussels. He is a man who operates in the shadows. He looks at the map. He knows that Belgium will fall. He knows the Nazis will come for his assets. And he knows that if the German war machine gets its hands on the stockpile at Shinkolobwe, the Third Reich will not just win the war, they will own the future. Most businessmen would panic. Sengier executed a logistical masterstroke. Without an order from any government, acting entirely on his own authority, He issued a command to his managers in the Congo: close the mine, ship the ore. This was not a small package. We are talking about 1,100 tons of the highest grade uranium ore in existence. Imagine the scene: a fleet of rusted colonial ships loaded with metal drums painted with innocent markings, navigating the Atlantic Ocean. The waters were teeming with German U-boats. One torpedo could have sent the entire future of the nuclear age to the bottom of the sea. But the shipment made it. Sengier directed the ships to New York. He rented a nondescript warehouse on Staten Island, the Archer Daniels Midland Warehouse. He employed a local stevedoring company to offload the drums. He didn't tell the FBI. He didn't tell the White House. He simply stacked 100 to 200 tons of potential doom next to crates of wheat and machinery, locked the door, and went to his office in Manhattan to wait. For 2 years, the United States government ran around like a headless chicken, trying to source uranium. They were buying scrap tailings from Colorado. They were desperate, and all the while the Uranium King was sitting a ferry ride away, holding the keys to victory in his pocket. And here is where the story turns into a spy thriller. Because the deal that transferred this power wasn't made in the Oval Office. It was made in a room full of cigar smoke where silence spoke louder than words. September 1942. The Manhattan Project is finally formed. General Leslie Groves needs uranium immediately. His supply is zero. His deputy, Colonel Kenneth Nichols, tracks down Sengier in New York. The meeting didn't look like a military negotiation. It looked like a mafia sit-down. There were no lawyers present, no lengthy contracts, just 2 men in a dimly lit room in the Waldorf Towers. Nichols entered, anxious, carrying the weight of the war. He started to stammer about potential future needs, trying to keep the project secret. Sengier didn't speak. He simply watched the colonel with the eyes of a predator who has already trapped his prey. He knew exactly what the Americans were building. He knew they were desperate. He let the silence stretch until it was uncomfortable. Then, with the slow, deliberate movement of a man who owns the room, Sengier slid a piece of yellow paper across the desk. "I have been waiting for you," he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "The ore is on Staten Island. You can have it tomorrow. No haggling, no patriotic speeches, just a transaction. The most lethal purchase in human history happened over a handshake. The clinking of crystal, the scratch of a fountain pen on a yellow pad. That was the sound of the world changing. The U.S. government bought the Staten Island stockpile, the remaining ore in Congo, and the rights to the mine. The price, roughly $160 per pound. The material that would incinerate Hiroshima was bought for the price of a cheap lunch. It was the greatest insider trade in history. If you are the kind of person who wants to see the receipts of power, the prices paid for the world we live in, hit that subscribe button. We uncover the history that doesn't make it into the textbooks, now." While the ink was drying in New York, a different kind of darkness was descending on the Congo. We know about Los Alamos, the secret city in the desert where scientists lived behind barbed wire. It was a place of white lab coats, film badges to measure radiation, and strict medical protocols. The Americans knew the danger. They treated their scientists like national treasures. But Los Alamos had a dark twin, a shadow city thousands of miles away in the jungle. Once the deal was signed, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers descended on Shinkolobwe. They turned it into a fortress of unprecedented paranoia. The OSS declared the site a zone of exclusion. They erased Shinkolobwe from the maps. They built watchtowers and ordered guards to shoot trespassers on sight. But inside the perimeter, there were no lab coats. The miners were Congolese. They were subjects of a brutal colonial regime. To the Americans and Belgians, they were not national treasures. They were biological machinery. The ore at Shinkolobwe was so radioactive that it was warm to the touch. The miners called it magic earth. They worked shirtless in the sweltering heat. They dug the pitchblende with pickaxes. They hauled it up in woven baskets on their naked backs. There were no Geiger counters for them, no lead suits, no respirators. While Oppenheimer's team was shielded by lead glass, the men in Katanga were inhaling the dust and drinking the water. Reports from the time describe young men coughing up blood, their skin covered in strange lesions, dying of a fatigue that never went away. The OSS sent agents not to improve safety, but to ensure security. Their job was to make sure not a single gram of rock was stolen, not to save a single life. The bomb that was assembled in New Mexico was not just metal and circuitry. It was physically made of the blood and lungs of these men. When you see the mushroom cloud over Hiroshima, you are looking at the vaporized essence of Shinkolobwe. It was the thorny fruit finally bursting open, fueled by the lives of men who never knew what they were digging. But what if Sengier hadn't moved that ore? What if that warehouse in Staten Island had been empty? The answer lies not in fantasy but in cold, hard logistics. Without Edgar Sengier, the Manhattan Project hits a mathematical wall. The scientists at Los Alamos would have had the design, but not the fuel. To refine enough uranium using the low-grade ore available in Colorado would have taken not months, but years. The timeline shifts. 1945 passes. No Trinity Test. No Hiroshima. No Nagasaki. The war doesn't end in August. Instead, the United States is forced into Operation Downfall, the land invasion of Japan. The casualty estimates for this operation were terrifying. Over 1 million American lives and 10 million Japanese. But the real shift happens in Europe. While the Allies are bogged down in a grinding war in the Pacific, the Soviet machine doesn't stop. Without the threat of an American atomic bomb to check his ambition, Stalin pushes west. The Iron Curtain doesn't divide Germany, it divides France. Edgar Sengier didn't just sell rocks, he sold time. He sold the geopolitical balance that defined the next 50 years. Sengier became the first non-American civilian to be awarded the Medal for Merit. He received it in a secret ceremony. No press, no photos. The US government wanted to keep him happy, but they also wanted to keep him quiet. They buried the story. They poured concrete over the mine shafts. But you cannot hide a curse. Today, if you go to the site of Shinkolobwe, it is officially closed, but satellites still pick up heat signatures. Artisanal miners, desperate and hungry, still dig into the earth illegally. They pull out cobalt now for your iPhone and your Tesla. But the uranium is still there. The radiation is still there. The story of the Shinkolobwe mine is the ultimate lesson in how the world actually works. We obsess over presidents and generals. We watch the speeches. We debate the ideologies. But the real history is written in the ledgers of companies like Union Miniere. It is written in shipping manifests. It is written by men like Edgar Sengier, who view the end of the world as just another supply chain issue to be managed. The atomic bomb was a triumph of science, yes. But before it was physics, it was geology. And before it was a weapon, it was a business deal. In the end, Einstein wrote the letter. Oppenheimer built the gadget. Truman gave the order. But it was a Belgian businessman who packed the bags. And it was the Congo that paid the bill. The next time you hear about strategic resources or national security, remember the warehouse on Staten Island. Remember that the most dangerous things in the world are often hiding in plain sight, waiting for the right buyer to walk through the door.